The gates had already fallen. Smoke curled upward into a sky the color of ash, and somewhere beneath the silence of a burning city, a woman knelt in the mud, waiting to learn what kind of world she now belonged to. This was not an isolated tragedy. It was policy, it was calculation, and it would echo across centuries, quite literally, in the blood of millions who walk the earth today without knowing why. We are talking about the Mongol conquests, not the version taught in textbooks with maps and arrows and dates. The other version, the one measured not in territory, but in trauma. To understand what happened to women after a Mongol city fell, you have to understand something disturbing about how Genghis Khan and his successors saw war itself. For the Mongols, conquest was never only about land. It was about erasure and rebuilding the world in their own image, sometimes down to the bloodline. Historians and geneticists have found something remarkable and deeply unsettling. Today, roughly 16 million men across Asia carry a Y chromosome lineage traced back to a single source, believed by many researchers to be Genghis Khan himself. 16 million descendants from one man in less than 1,000 years. That number is not a coincidence of history. It's a record left behind, a genetic fingerprint of conquest, of power exercised not only on battlefields but on bodies. And to understand how that fingerprint spread so far, so fast, we need to go back to the beginning. Back to a boy who once had nothing, no army, no empire, not even his own freedom, and who would grow into a force so ruthless, entire civilizations would rewrite their laws just to survive contact with him. To understand what came next, we have to rewind back before the empire, before the terror, before the name Genghis Khan meant the end of the world for millions. His birth name was Temujin, and his early life was defined by abandonment and near total ruin. His father was poisoned when Temujin was still a boy. His clan, seeing weakness, abandoned his family to starve on the open steppe. He grew up hunted, hungry, and humiliated, and somewhere in that suffering, something hardened inside him. He would later build an empire on a single, brutal principle. Absolute loyalty was rewarded, and resistance was answered with annihilation. By the time he unified the Mongol tribes under his banner, Temujin was no longer just a survivor. He had become something else, a strategist who understood that fear could conquer faster than swords ever could. And this is where the psychological warfare begins. Before Mongol armies even reached a city's walls, rumors had already arrived. Stories of previous cities reduced to rubble, of populations erased, of resistance met with total destruction. The Mongols wanted these stories to spread. Terror was a weapon they sharpened deliberately. When a city surrendered without a fight, it was often spared the worst. But when a city resisted, when it dared to close its gates and defy the horde outside, the consequences were engineered to become legend. Not just defeat, obliteration, a message written in ash and silence, meant to travel faster than any army, reaching the next city long before Mongol horses did. This strategy worked. Entire kingdoms surrendered simply from rumor alone, terrified of becoming the next cautionary tale. But for those who resisted and lost, what followed was a systematic reordering of an entire society. Men, women, artisans, soldiers, nobles, every person had a designated fate in the machinery of conquest. And it's in this machinery that the fate of women becomes especially telling of how the Mongols viewed power itself. In the aftermath of a conquered city, survivors were sorted not randomly, but with cold administrative precision. Skilled craftsmen were spared and shipped east, put to work building the empire's infrastructure. Soldiers who surrendered in time might be absorbed into the Mongol war machine itself, sent to conquer the next city in line. But women occupied a different, more chilling category in this system. They became part of the spoils to be distributed. This wasn't chaos. It was structured, almost bureaucratic in nature. Women of noble birth were sometimes given to Mongol commanders as wives, cementing political alliances and folding conquered bloodlines directly into the ruling class. Others were distributed among soldiers as a reward for loyalty and service, a practice that reinforced obedience within the ranks while simultaneously reshaping the demographics of entire regions. This is the uncomfortable truth historians still grapple with. The Mongols didn't just conquer territory. They redesigned population itself. Marriages were arranged not out of affection, but out of strategy, binding defeated families to the empire, ensuring loyalty through kinship, and diluting the possibility of future rebellion. A conquered people who shared blood with their conquerors were far less likely to rise against them. And this is where that staggering genetic statistic returns to haunt us. 16 million men, carrying a shared paternal lineage, spread across a landmass larger than most empires in human history. That number isn't just about one powerful man having many descendants. It's about a system, a machine of conquest that operated, in part, through the systematic control of women's bodies and futures across an entire continent. For the women living through this, the psychological toll was staggering. Overnight, they lost their families, their names, their language, their entire identity, absorbed into a foreign power that had just destroyed everything they knew. Historical records from Persian and Chinese chroniclers describe entire populations gripped by a specific, particular fear. Not simply death, but what would come after survival. But here's what makes this story even more disturbing. The fear wasn't only physical. It was existential. Chroniclers of the time, from Persian historian Juvayni to Chinese court scribes, described a psychological collapse that swept through conquered territories. Entire cities, upon hearing Mongol forces were approaching, experienced what can only be described as mass panic, a kind of pre-traumatic terror absorbed before a single arrow was fired. This is the part historians rarely emphasize enough. The Mongols understood something about human psychology centuries before it had a name. They knew that a population paralyzed by fear would surrender faster, resist less, and rebuild slower. Terror wasn't a side effect of their conquest, it was the engine of it. And for the women who survived the fall of a city, the trauma didn't end with the war. It extended into every generation that followed. Communities absorbed into the empire often carried a permanent unspoken scar, a collective memory passed down through families who now lived, worked, and even loved within a system built on their own subjugation. Some historians argue this is precisely why Mongol rule, despite its brutal beginnings, eventually stabilized into something resembling order. The Pax Mongolica, the so-called Mongol peace, allowed trade routes to flourish, ideas to spread, and distant civilizations to connect for the first time in history. But this peace was built on a foundation soaked in the suffering of the people who had no choice but to comply. This is the paradox that makes Mongol history so unsettling to study. The same empire responsible for organized terror and forced integration is also credited with connecting East and West, enabling the flow of technology, religion, and knowledge that shaped the modern world. Progress and atrocity intertwined, inseparable from one another. So what do we do with a legacy like this? One written not just in stone monuments and ancient texts, but in the DNA of millions of people alive today, most of whom will never know the true origin of their bloodline. Perhaps the most haunting part of this history isn't what happened in those conquered cities 800 years ago. It's what it reveals about power itself. How far it can reach, how deeply it can rewrite a population, and how silently its consequences can travel across generations without anyone realizing the source. Today, millions of people across Asia and beyond carry genetic markers linking them to this era of conquest, entirely unaware that their ancestry traces back to one of the most calculated campaigns of terror and control in human history. They are living proof that empires don't just fall, their consequences persist, embedded quietly in the very structure of who we are. And that raises an uncomfortable question worth sitting with. How much of what we consider normal today, borders, bloodlines, even entire populations, was shaped not by peace, but by conquest? How many of history's quiet legacies were built on chapters we'd rather not examine too closely? The Mongols didn't just conquer land. They rewrote the future of entire civilizations, using fear, strategy, and control over human life itself as instruments of empire. And the echoes of that strategy, encoded in genetics, culture, and memory, are still with us, whether we choose to acknowledge them or not. So the next time you hear about an empire's golden age, ask yourself what silence lies beneath it. Ask what stories were erased to make room for the ones we were taught. Because history, as we're often reminded, is written by the victors, but its true weight is carried by those who survived what came before the peace.